Hello, my name is Adam, and I'm on a quest to be the most prolific reviewer of all time, which means I review books, movies, podcasts, plays, whatever I want, basically. And today I am reviewing the 1954 monster movie classic, the movie that launched one of the most long-running franchises and successful franchises of all time, Godzilla. So I'm going to give my opinion. Maybe stick around to the end and see if you agree with my opinion. Alright, so if you don't know, Godzilla is a Japanese production. The original, I'm talking about the 1954 uh, film. It's the first film in the Godzilla franchise. It was directed by Ishiro Honda, and the screenplay was by Takio Murata, and it stars a bunch of actors who would become famous for their roles in this franchise, like Akira Takarada, Monoko Kochi, and Akihiro Hirata, who plays a character who sacrifices himself, but later he'll be back in the franchise. And somebody who is like a mainstay. So this movie was produced by Toho Studios, and Toho Studios is the studio company that hired and employed Akira Kurosawa, who in my opinion is one of the best directors of all time. And also, so a lot of these actors, especially the one that I'm going to mention, are in Kurosawa films as well. So Takeshi Shimura, who played the main character in Ikiru, very, very ably, very beautiful, very brilliant film, very brilliant acting. So it's kind of interesting to see an actor who can really act in this film, which at its heart is a genre film. But is it only a genre film? No, it's really weird. It's kind of like if you compare the first Godzilla film with all of the Godzilla films that came after, and I haven't seen all of the Godzilla films. I think there's like 50 something of them. I've seen this one recently. I saw Godzilla Minus One recently, and probably a few others in the franchise. But if you take this one and you compare it to the movies that came after, it's kind of like the difference between Rambo First Blood and all of the other Rambos. So if you haven't seen Rambo First Blood, it's a kind of a psychological take on the trauma of war, and then later Rambo becomes more of an action figure, more and more of an action figure. That's hard to say, but like an action hero, and then he would have action figures and he'd have a cartoon. But Rambo originally was about the trauma of war. And Godzilla 2 is about the trauma of war, specifically nuclear war, because he gets awoken because they're testing the H bomb. And spoiler alert for the movie, he gets stopped in this film by a scientist who invents a a device which is as destructive as an atomic bomb, called the oxygen destroyer. So you have the motivation of awakening this monster, but also you have the devastation that the monster kind of wreaks upon Japan and Tokyo. And it's clearly a response to the trauma of the atomic bomb, which had been dropped only 7 years earlier than this movie. And I was thinking about, like, I can't even comprehend living through such a momentous event. And there's two. So, not only is this clearly a metaphor for the atomic attacks on Japan, it's clearly that, like, the destruction is wanton and indiscriminate. Um, but there's also, like, clear visual and plot connections to that event. So, for example, there's many scenes where there's hospitals and there's like people who are lying, and people are treating their burns mostly. And it's weird because Godzilla does have this heat breath kind of thing, but most of them probably were injured because of Godzilla stomping around. So yeah, that's one thing, and the other thing would be that the characters. So there's these two parts where one character says, "So I think she's on a train or something, and she's talking to people on the train, and somebody says, "Oh, Godzilla's coming," and she's like, "Oh, I hope I get away this time because I was this close from being in Nagasaki when the bomb went off." And you're like, I was like, "Oh my God, that's crazy!" Like, again, I can't imagine living through that time period in Japanese history. Just just horrible. And then there's this scene where this mom is, you know, holding her children, and it's clear that the building's about to collapse around her, and she says, "Don't worry, kids, we're gonna go where Daddy is soon." And it is really, really heartbreaking. So, and a lot of the characters are veterans of the Second World War. The Japanese army, the scientist that I mentioned has lost an eye because he was fighting in the war. And like, it's kind of really, I don't know how to express it, but it seems so odd for me that you would have this like a civilization changing event, like living through two nuclear bombs, and then having your country be occupied, and who knows how many percentage of your young men died during that conflict, and then you'd be like, yeah, let's make a monster movie about that. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I can kind of understand why they would do it, because there's actually something that Japanese culture probably doesn't have a good track record of talking about, and that is actual guilt for the war and war crimes, because something horrible happened to Japan, right? Like two nuclear bombs were dropped on Japan, and that was really, really horrible, and many civilians died then and later. Big tragedy, right? But it's not like Japan was completely innocent, and the Japanese government and the Japanese people were completely innocent in this. They were trying to create their own colonial empire, and they were doing like very brutal things in China and Korea, and you know, uh, they snuck attack multiple countries, like Singapore wasn't a country at the time, but in Hong Kong, the British, and also the Americans. So they, at least in terms of the Pacific War against the Americans, they 100% provoked a reaction, and they got a reaction. It's complicated because no, when civilians die in a war, it's not the civilians' fault, right? But it's clearly the government and the military's establishment's fault. And you know, there is this like big trauma you can see in Japanese culture and Japanese filmmaking, probably even to this day, right? But the big trauma then is like, we kind of did it to ourselves, but on the other hand, we didn't do it to ourselves, because it seems like not properly balanced in their opinion, in their minds. And I don't know how I feel about that, because Godzilla is a perfect metaphor for that. It's like some monster that attacks us and we don't have anything to do with it, right? We didn't wake up Godzilla. It was these nuclear tests that happened. And then it's actually connected to real life, because maybe about a month before they started making the movie, there was some nuclear tests that the Americans were doing, and a Japanese vessel got caught in the way, and the fallout landed on the boat and destroying the ketch, and the I think a few people on the boat died. So this was like the first time that Japanese society, well, maybe not the first time, because obviously the two bombs dropped on them, but it was the first time there was a vocal anti-nuclear weapon movement in Japan. Um, and I think like I don't know how to balance the fact that Godzilla is about this force of nature that's awakened by an unnatural weapon, and the Japanese people themselves are not directly responsible for what happens to them. But on the other hand, they have this imperial past that they're not talking about. They're only like kind of obliquely referencing it. Akira is a good example of a film, which is another Toho Studio film that I mentioned, but by Kurosawa. And so it's about the dying man's relationship with his son, partially. And his son, there's a scene where his son goes to war, and everyone's, have like got like bonsai like banners and stuff, and it's a train of soldiers going to war, and the son is like crying, and the dad doesn't do anything. So it's also like a scene like, why didn't our parents do anything to stop this, right? And in this movie, it's also obliquely referenced this imperial past. I think maybe I'm stretching at something, but I think the fact that there is sympathy to Godzilla by a few characters. Well, one character, this professor, he's like, well, we need to study Godzilla. Like, this is an amazing opportunity. So it does say that I think it is kind of a metaphor for this reaction. Like, yeah, the Americans did this horrible thing to us, but why did they do that? They shouldn't have done that. That was a horrible thing, but there's like context, and we're not looking at the context. So yeah, I think it's really, for such a simple movie, it's really really complicated, the message of the movie. And I mean, I think I've probably seen this movie, but in the version that was sent to Americans. In the version that was sent to Americans, all of the references to nuclear testing and Nagasaki and Hiroshima were eliminated from the film. So it was just like this big monster movie thing. And monster movies were really popular in 1954 in the United States. But it's interesting, like, Americans could make monster movies that were metaphors for the dangers of atomic experimentation, but the actual victims of atomic weapons couldn't do it in American eyes. Like, that was too controversial. But again, this is only 7 years after the end of the war, where many people's families lost brothers, sons, because of the war, right? Fighting the Japanese. So, so complicated. But yeah, so I think Americans kind of have a perception of Godzilla from the very beginning, which is very different than what the perception of Godzilla is in Japanese culture. And even to this day, like I mentioned that Godzilla is this franchise that has like 50 movies or whatever, but there's like Japanese Godzilla movies, and there's American Godzilla movies. So it's kind of like Star Trek, but different, like more based on culture. And the thing also that's really, really odd about the movie is it's considered to be one of the greatest monster movies of all time. But, and the parts where Godzilla is rampaging and, he's crushing these big models. They actually invented that kind of filmmaking. It's called takusatu media, where you have like a guy in a monster suit who's crushing like a very big models. looks so fun and it looks so good, and you know, clearly they're models, so you can say, okay, yeah, it's fun. It's not a real train that he's picking up, it's like a toy train. So very, very fun. So the movie, so yeah, it's a weird blend of very serious message and fun. You know, this Godzilla's rampage is fun, right? Like it's like, oh my god, it's like a what do you call that? A demolition derby. It's like a demolition derby, but with a monster. And I think if we look at the actual acting in the movie, it's not that great. Um, Maybe not the guy who plays Akira, the professor. He's actually really good because he's a really good actor. But the other three actors who are like the main, so there's a love interest and a guy and another guy. They're not that good, and especially the actress. Like she's very cute and everything, but she's screaming all the time. Like her friend shows her this oxygen destroyer, which basically removes the flesh from fish, and she screams like ah, which like she is in mortal danger of this weapon. And the movie, we don't see actually what happens, like why she's screaming. We see later, and yeah, there's not really any reason for her to scream like that. So the acting is not good. It's like a B movie, I would say. Like it's not a high quality movie at all, except for the most important part, which is Godzilla like rampaging, and that part is really, really good, and it's definitely worth watching. All right, so I really like this movie, and I think like the consensus is like 7 out of 10, and I think that's fair because the acting for the most part not great, but the story is good and entertaining, and it does make you think a lot about the history of the world and Japan and Japan's place in it, especially after the Second World War. All right, what did you think about this movie? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Let me know in the comment section where commenting is to be had. If you like what I do, please like and subscribe. Um, I'm looking for 150 subscribers by the end of January, and currently I have 137. So I think that is a goal that I can reach. All right, and if you really want to support the podcast or the channel, take a look at the thingy, the Patreon that's in the description. Bye bye.